Good evening, everybody. Go ahead and open up your Bibles to 1 Samuel chapter 19. We're going to be in chapter 19 and 20 tonight. If you need questions, lesson 305, those questions are in the back. 306 should be on the back side of that page as well, which will take care of this coming Sunday's lesson. Before we get started with the reading, let's go ahead and have a word of prayer. Our Father in heaven, you are the great and all-powerful God of the universe. We recognize you as the sustainer of all things, as the author of the plan of our salvation. And we recognize you, Father, as our all-loving Father who has gone to the greatest lengths to redeem us, who has given his only Son for our sake to bridge the gap that sin has caused to divide between us, Father. And we pray as we study your word, as we seek to learn more about who you are and what you have done for us, we pray that we open our hearts to mold our lives after the examples that you have given to us, and namely the example of Jesus Christ, our Savior. We ask all these things through Jesus' name. Amen. 1 Samuel chapter 19 and 20 tonight. We've been talking about Saul, David, the current stage of their lives that we are in here as David has been anointed. We have seen the downfall of Saul as he has turned away from God after being appointed king and being set over as king for a short period of time. And so we're in this transition period where we've seen David anointed, and we've seen David rise to this position of prominence, of great fame amongst the people of Israel for all the successes that he has, because God has been blessing him. But we've seen some animosity been growing with Saul because of what he has seen from David, because of David's success. Not only David's success, but more so how people have responded to David's success. And so last chapter, we really got to see Saul beginning to scheme ways to kill David. And today, we're going to talk a little bit more about some more things that Saul tries to do to undermine David, to kill David, and secure his own lineage on the throne. And so just kind of keeping in mind what's happened before has been leading us up to this point, and it's only going to continue to increase. We're going to break this up into two sections, as I normally like to do when we have two chapters to read. But we'll read chapter 19, we'll discuss it a little bit, and then we'll pick up in chapter 20 after a little discussion. All right, chapter 19 of 1 Samuel. And Saul spoke to Jonathan his son and to all his servants that they should kill David. But Jonathan, Saul's son, delighted much in David. And Jonathan told David, Saul, my father, seeks to kill you. Therefore be on your guard in the morning. Stay in a secret place and hide yourself. And I will go out and stand beside my father in the field where you are, and I will speak to my father about you. And if I learn anything, I will tell you. And Jonathan spoke well of David to Saul his father, and said to him, Let not the king sin against his servant David, because he has not sinned against you, because his deeds have brought good to you. For he took his life in his hand, and he struck down the Philistine. And the Lord worked a great salvation for all Israel. You saw it and rejoiced. Why then will you sin against the innocent blood by killing David without cause? And Saul listened to the voice of Jonathan. Saul swore, As the Lord lives, he shall not be put to death. And Jonathan called David, and Jonathan reported to him all these things. And Jonathan brought David to Saul, and he was in his presence as before. And there was war again. And David went out and fought with the Philistines and struck them with a great blow, so that they fled before him. Then a harmful spirit from the Lord came upon Saul as he sat in his house with his spear in his hand. And David was playing the lyre. And Saul sought to pin David to the wall with the spear, but he eluded Saul, so that he struck the spear into the wall, and David fled and escaped that night. Saul sent messengers to David's house to watch him, that he might kill him in the morning. But Michal, David's wife, told him, If you do not escape with your life tonight, tomorrow you will be killed." So Michal let David down through the window, and he fled away and escaped. Michal took an image and laid it on the bed and put a pillow of goat's hair at its head and covered it with clothes. And when Saul sent messengers to take David, she said, "He is sick." Then Saul sent the messengers to see David, saying, "Bring him up to me in the bed, that I may kill him." And when the messengers came in, behold, the image was in the bed with the pillow of goat's hair at its head. Saul said to Michal, "Why have you deceived me thus, and let my enemy go, so that he has escaped?" And Michal answered Saul, "He said to me, 'Let me go. Why should I kill you?'" Now David fled and escaped, and he came to Samuel at Ramah, and told him all that Saul had done to him. And he and Samuel went and lived at Naioth. And he told Saul, "Behold, David is at Naioth in Ramah." Then Saul sent messengers to take David, and when they saw the company of the prophets prophesying, and Samuel standing as head over them, the Spirit of God came upon the messengers of Saul, and they also prophesied. When it was told Saul, he sent other messengers, and they also prophesied. Saul sent messengers again the third time, and they also prophesied. Then he himself went to Ramah and came to the great well that is in Seku. And he said, "Where are Samuel and David?" And one said, "Behold, they are at Naioth in Ramah." And he went there to Naioth in Ramah, and the Spirit of God came upon him also. And he went, and as he went, he prophesied until he came to Naioth in Ramah. And he too stripped off his clothes, and he too prophesied before Samuel, and lay naked all that day and all that night. Thus it is said, "Is Saul also among the prophets?" That's chapter 19. So we mentioned how the lead up, the context of this chapter shows this growing animosity with Saul for David because of who David is and because of the success and the glory that he is receiving from the people, right? And this all kind of started back in chapter 18 and verse 7. The ladies are singing that song, "Saul has slain his thousands, David his 10,000s." And we talked about how the phrasing mentioned how from that day on, Saul was eyeing David. And every time it talks about after that, what Saul was able to see in David was how God was with David and how God blessed David. And does anybody remember what it said that did to Saul when he saw that God was with David? What emotion did that bring about in Saul? Yeah, he was afraid. You know, he saw that God was with David and he became afraid, all right? And, you know, that could go for a number of reasons, whether it, you know, brought fear out of him that he was going to be a difficult, you know, person to take down, or, you know, I like to think a large portion of it is him remembering how God was once with him. And now he sees David, who does things the right way, who follows in the footsteps that God has laid out for him. And Saul had that opportunity and turned away from it. And we've seen, and we will continue to see him continue to go down a path of sin and self-destruction. But Saul is also continually reminded of his sin because David is so righteous in his acts. It further reveals Saul's evil actions. And I mentioned this on Sunday, the fact of, you know, when we are caught up in sin, the last thing we want to be surrounded by is people that are doing the right thing, right? I'm not saying that's the way we should feel, but I'm saying when we are sinning, we don't want to be around people doing the right thing. It doesn't make us, when we are in this position of, you know, selfishness or whatever we're doing, lust, anger, whatever kind of things we're caught up in, right? We don't want to be reminded of what good is. We don't want to be reminded of what the righteous path is. And so Saul's going to be continually in this stage as we kind of carry on through these next several chapters with him and David. And so just keeping that in mind of like, why is Saul acting the way that he does? And well, you know, that's a large part of it. He's constantly reminded of, you know, Saul and his wickedness is constantly being contrasted with David and his righteous actions. And God choosing David and abandoning Saul. And so here in chapter 19, to start off with, the issue with Saul trying to kill David is still at hand, obviously, and now it's becoming a little bit more known amongst other people besides just within Saul's own heart. He's telling other people about it, so he talks to Jonathan, his son, here at the start of the chapter. So how does Jonathan play a role here to start chapter 19? What does Jonathan do on behalf of David?
Well, he said, if you could find out anything from the start,
Okay, so Jonathan's going to kind of act as a spy, as it were, almost. I mean, he doesn't use that term now. But essentially, he's going to see what he can figure out from his dad, from his interactions with him, and, see, like, all right, if we can get this kind of cleared up, kind of resolve this issue. So what happens in the interaction between Jonathan and Saul? Because we're going to see kind of multiple interactions tonight that they have, and this first one goes a little bit differently. So what does Jonathan do on behalf of David? John?
Well, the way I see it, Jonathan starts speaking up for David in strong enough words and speaks well enough of him and brings some other points to Saul's attention. And he says, now, he's a pretty good guy, and here you're treating him bad, and it's just not right. So he tries to get a promise from his dad, and he does get one. His dad says, okay, I'll lay off for a while.
Okay, so John mentions the fact that, Jonathan gives these reasons to his father of why he shouldn't be killing David or pursuing David at all. What are some of the reasons? What does he say? And we talked about these a little bit last class, but what are some of the main reasons that Jonathan tells him, hey, you shouldn't be going after David? Just
one of his reasons was about killing the giant. That helps him.
Yeah. Look there at the beginning. Verse 5. He took his life in his own hand, and he struck down the Philistine. And the Lord worked a great salvation for all Israel. And then he even says after that, you saw that and you rejoiced, right? You were happy about it. You were happy at what David did, right? And so here we're still kind of seeing the fallout from David's grand success here on the battlefield, with not just all the further battles he has that we talked about last class, but also specifically the battle with Goliath. So Jonathan brings that up here, but he's saying, hey, you saw it and this pleased you. This is what you wanted. And so now you've gone the other way. Justin, you have something to add?
Pleasing Saul and also made jealous. Because David got too much credit.
Right. So we saw last class how Saul's jealousy rose from David's success, and not even his success, because the success aided Saul, but it was more how people responded to the success, right? The response from the people, which we talked about on Sunday. Saul does so much stuff based on how the people respond to him, right? His two grand mistakes that we've been audience to were out of fear of the people abandoning him and fear of the people, kind of despising him for destroying, some of the spoils of war. So he's reacted a lot out of fear in a lot of these decisions, but especially the decisions are kind of being formed by how he thinks the people respond to him. And so first thing he talks about, hey, David did this good thing by killing the Philistine. What else did he do? I mean, what other excuse does he give? Like, hey, why you shouldn't be killing him? What else does Jonathan say? Dad?
So you're going to sin if you do this against David. And that's pretty bold. And he was loyal to David and what was right. And that's how we should be. We should go to people who are sinning with love and concern like Jonathan did and say, this is wrong. You're going against the Lord and you're doing what's wrong, even if it's the king.
Yeah, very good. So looking in verse 4, it mentions Jonathan speaks well of David to Saul. It says, let not the king sin against his servant David, because he has not sinned against you, and because his deeds have brought good to you. And then we mentioned what he talks about in with his interactions with Goliath, but then kind of jumping down later on in verse 5, why then will you sin against innocent blood by killing David without cause? So, besides the fact of, hey, what David's done has brought good to you, the other side of it is, all right, even if he had no impact on you, the fact is he's not sinned against you. He's done no wrong against you. He's not sinned. You are going to be engaged in sinning by shedding innocent blood. And we can find scriptures that talk about how God despises those who, shed innocent blood, right? And really, this is what Jonathan is boiling this conversation down. Hey, you can't do this because this is sin, right? And so kind of to pick up and move on, does Saul accept this reasoning from Jonathan? Yeah. Yes, he does. And I think these are kind of simple interactions that let you know, while we've seen a lot of wicked things that Saul has done, and we're going to see other wicked things that he's about to do in these coming chapters, these are kind of like very human interactions that I think, show how this isn't just a straight evil man who only thinks evil thoughts, right? We've seen how, while Saul is twisted and is often misinformed on what he should be doing or what God wants him to do, there are occasionally times where he tries to play things off as if he is, doing this in service of God's glory, or this is, I thought I was doing what God wanted to. But I think a situation like this, Jonathan's interaction here is so straightforward. It's like, listen, you have nothing you can even bring as like a somewhat, floppy charge to be able to reason with executing David or killing David. Like, there's nothing you can do to even convince anyone that this was a righteous kill. Okay, so he's letting him know, hey, this is going to be viewed as sin, obviously in the eyes of God, but I think part of this language is everyone else is going to look at you and be like, this was wrong. You're not going to be able to convince anyone that this was right. And so Saul agrees, says, all right, I'm not going to do anything with David. He shall not be put to death. Makes this oath, as the Lord lives, he shall not be put to death. Okay? Now, what happens after that? Does that oath stand firm? Short-lived. All right, so we see another interaction where David is sent out to war. He's successful, right? He's continuing to deal heavy blows to the Philistines and strike them down. And so during this time, what is sent to Saul? Again, we've seen this happen before, but what is sent to Saul in verse 9? Harmful spirit. I heard somebody mention it. Harmful spirit sent to Saul. Now, the very first interactions we see described in 1 Samuel are of Saul and David meeting because of this harmful spirit. What did David do to help soothe Saul when he had the harmful spirit? Sorry, say that again. Yeah, he was playing music for him, right? He was a very skilled musician, playing the lyre here, and he tries to soothe Saul, and now what does Saul do? Tries to kill him again, right? It's almost like a copy-paste situation. Frustrated, angry, all these reasons, he hurls the spear at David again, and David evades him and flees. And now, it's kind of like, all right, that's, things aren't stable. The oath has been broken, or the vow he made to Jonathan. And so David's kind of going to be on the move for a while now. Before David really exits out of the city and leaves, how does his wife, Michal, help him? How does she play a part in this chapter?
She made his bed look like he was in it.
Yeah, and he sneaks out, right? She tells him, hey, if you stay here tonight, tomorrow you're going to be killed. So you've got to leave now. she sneaks him out of the house, puts kind of a dummy in the bed to, fake them all out, tells them, hey, he's ill up in the bed. Saul sends his messengers up there. He realizes he's been fooled, and, David evades him. Kind of an interesting thing to think about, but why is it somewhat strange that Jonathan and Michael are the two characters that have successfully gone to bat for David here at the beginning of chapter 19? Jacob? Yeah, they're Saul's family, right? So obviously David was given Michael as kind of a reward for for killing Goliath, and David got to marry one of Saul's daughters because of that. But she loved David. They are married now. Jonathan loves David. They love each other as their own soul. So they have these close relationships. But also the fact that it's not just that they love David, but it's the fact that Saul is their father. And yet they are continually going to bat for David in defiance of what Saul wishes, right? And Saul is not only their father, he is also the king. And so Dad mentioned it earlier, the fact that Jonathan goes and condemns Saul's actions, which, is very easily could result in the king killing you where you stand, right? If you question the king's intentions, if you question the king's morality, most of history would probably tell you you're not surviving the conversation. So Jonathan puts his life on the line there. Michael, same kind of thing. She outright deceives her father, to spare David. So David is being spared ultimately by God, but we see how Saul's own family is going to bat for David. Go ahead, John.
This figure that Michael puts in the bed, then she tells him he's sick. But, Saul is determined to get him, bring his bed and all. That's really something.
Yeah, he's going to spare no expense to hunt David down. Yeah. Jordan, do you have a comment?
Reading a little past this story this morning, and it struck me for the first time. There's kind of some parallels between what happens in the beginning of Exodus with what's happening with David in his story. How there's this kind of oppression on Israel in Exodus, and you take in Moses to Pharaoh's family, and he's kind of raised there, and then he has to go away and come back. And we see David, he's the one who's going to succeed Saul. He's brought into the family, he's persecuted, has to go away, and then he gets to come back. And specifically with Saul, I see a lot of kind of that Pharaoh attitude, that there's this threat to me, to my rule, and every action he's taking is trying to secure himself, just like Pharaoh trying to secure himself. And it really struck me in, I think it's chapter 24, when Saul finally says, I have sinned. It reminds me of Pharaoh finally says that.
Yeah, that's a very good way to put it. And I think we'll see it more in chapter 20, where a lot of Saul's inner monologue, inner thoughts come out of like, all right, why does he really want to kill David? And in his, kind of communication with Jonathan is like, why to him it's obvious, but to everyone else they're not seeing the reasoning. So yeah, I think that's a good connection there. The Exodus parallel is kind of an issue one. I hadn't thought of that, but that's very good. So David's fled the presence of Saul. He's left, through the aid of his wife Michal, and he flees and goes to Ramah. That's where Samuel dwells. Kind of an ally that David knows he can turn to. So they go there, and they're hiding out from Saul. Saul eventually is, sending people out trying to figure out where David is gone. They get someone to actually say, hey, he's in Ramah. He's in this section of Ramah. And he sends out messengers. But what happens when Saul sends these messengers multiple waves after David and Samuel? What happens to the messengers?
Prophesy.
Yeah, they prophesy. Okay, so I'll let you guys kind of share your thoughts. What do you think about this? So instead of God turning them away or, stunting their ability to hunt him down or misleading them, he has all these messengers come and they just have to prophesy. What do you think about that? What significance is there in that? What is this showing? Anybody got any thoughts, feelings about that? Don't we really see a lot of times where this happens? So I kind of was curious, what did you all think God's revealing in doing this? Yeah, just.
Well, one thing, he never says what the prophecy is about. You're familiar with prophecy is
Okay, so we're not given much information on, it says they're prophesying. Don't have much more information than that, right? We don't really know what it is they're saying. I did read some stuff where it was saying, prophesying could have including, some forms of prayers or, praise to God in some form or fashion. So, what do you think? What message is God sending by having them do this, John?
Well, you see, they go for the purpose of doing a bad deed that Saul wants them to carry out so he can get David. Well, that turns out to be, and God turns it against him, in fact. His own men determine that they're going to be God-fearing men rather than follow Saul's orders.
Okay.
He did that twice before Saul himself went.
Okay, so there's 3 waves of these messengers that are sent. Each of them result in the messengers prophesying, praising God, offering prayers to God, whatever they're doing. What does that show? All right, so let me ask it this way. The messengers are originally sent for what purpose? For whose purposes are they sent? Who's commanding them? Saul. By them being there, laid out prophesying, who are they now in service to? God, right? So when you think of that, right, these men were sent with the direction and the leadership of Saul to go do this. They result each time in falling under the authority of God. I think it is leading us to the point where, and revealing to Saul, and maybe we should go ahead and mention the fact that Saul also comes and is subjected to prophesying on behalf of God. It's all showing that Saul's intentions, authority is all in subjection to God. All of this is about showing Saul, hey, you send your messengers, they will end with my own intentions. You bring yourself, you will fall under the path, the planning that I have. Despite whatever Saul's intentions are, God's going to make them fall under his own, blanket of what he desires to occur, which has been the whole problem the whole time, right? This is something that he's trying to hit Saul over the head with of you aren't in charge, right? And this is what God was afraid of from the very beginning with them setting up this false king, and by false king, I mean a king that is no longer God, right? By them asking for a new king that showed they were rejecting God, this is what God knew was going to happen, right? And Samuel gave all those, hey, beware of this, and this, all the things the king was going to take, the power the king was going to demand. Saul is literally walked right into all the, beware of things that Samuel told the people about. And he has tried to elevate his position over God. And did anybody get maybe any echoes of an older story, or I guess, no, sorry, wrong, future story of a king who, maybe got too big for his britches and God had to humble him and tear him down from the heights that he thought he was at and bring him below where he realized how truly futile his pursuit was in comparison to God. Who am I thinking of? John, you got?
Did you pick up on something that is obvious here, that it's in the background? Remember something happened back in the 15th and 16th chapter, and remember Samuel said, I will not see you anymore the rest of your life?
Okay.
Now here he is coming to Samuel in this, but he's prophesying. So some way, somehow, he's not be able to see Samuel, because Samuel told him, you're never going to see me again.
Yeah, well, I don't know how we'd see him when he's, face flat on the ground, no clothes, prophesying God. Like, I don't know how Saul's seen anyone, right? And yeah, I guess not. I guess he didn't get close enough to Samuel and David. But what king does God do something similar to? Nebuchadnezzar, right? You have a king who is clearly going in defiance of God's desires, God's will. And, while slightly different situations, Saul knows, because we've already talked about it, he sees God is with David, and he's still trying to pursue and kill David, even though he knows God's with him. So Saul is clearly living in defiance of God's will. Nebuchadnezzar, right? He is put up in a position where he can be a good source to so many people because of the wealth and power that he has accumulated. And, that image of that grand tree, but, it talks about how he looked out over everything and, look at what I have done, right? Look at what I have accumulated, and him setting himself up over God, and God brings him low for that. And so, he chops the tree down, as it were. So here in the same thing, Saul is completely brought low. Right? He's brought to the lowest of points, right? If you imagine a king goes out with this intention to strike down his enemy, and he ends up naked, prophesying before God, right? He's been brought pretty low to be found there ripping off his royal robes, losing all manner of his kingly form, and he's just another man revealed to be in subjection to God, right? And I think that's God's intention this whole time. Is like, to me, you are not the king. You are just as small and insignificant as any other man in comparison to my authority and power, right? And he's trying to get Saul to understand that. And yet we're going to see Saul continually live defiantly against God's wishes, even though God continually reminds Saul, like, you are not going to win. And I think, once again, just continuing to hammer the point home of why did they tear the kingdom away from Saul? Why did Samuel seem to come down hard on Saul for what seemed like maybe a minor infraction with some of this disobedience? Is because Saul chose his own path every time in comparison to God's. And just understanding how truly evil that is something that's going to keep showing up over and over again. Jacob, did you have a comment?
Back to your original question, the thing I thought of was 2 Kings 1 with Elijah and the king of Israel. Ahaziah fell and got injured, and he went to false gods to see if he was going to survive. And Elijah gives a message, and he doesn't like the message that people tell him he's going to go get Elijah, this other prophet. And these 50 men captain come to get him, a man of God, and said, if I'm a man of God, rain fire down and just destroy these dead people. And there's two sets of group of people that come back again, another 50, and he rains fire down and kills them. The third set, he goes with them. But it just reminded me, Saul sends two sets of people, then he goes himself to Samuel the prophet. But also just with this prophecy thing, it made me think of maybe in verse 6, what Saul says, as the Lord lives, you shall not be put to death. That maybe he doesn't realize he's prophesying there. That it's right. As long as Saul lives, even though he tries to kill him, most of the rest of his life, he isn't going to put him to death.
Yeah. he's constantly going to be, and I think so much of Saul's, this harmful spirit is this constant reminder that God is giving Saul, and how he puts David right in front of him so much of his life. Even though it's causing him to flourish, it causes such anguish for Saul because of, this impending promise that has been given to Saul of how it's going to be ripped from him. But I also think the other side, where it was like Samuel telling him, it could have been yours, and it could have been yours forever, and it could have been established, but David is going to be this constant reminder of everything that he has lost, despite the fact he's going to live the rest of his life trying to keep it for himself, right, and trying to cut David down. And Jacob mentioned, God basically prophesying through Saul, like, it's never going to happen. You're not going to win. Go ahead, John.
You're not going to have enough time to read the 20th chapter that I was.
Sounds like a challenge, John.
I was thinking about, Saul goes off the deep end so far, and in the 20th chapter even gives the spear to Jonathan, his own son. He falls off that far.
Yeah, I think, why don't we just get to chapter 20, John, and I can prove you wrong, and we can get to what you're talking about at the same time. Does that sound like a good idea? But yeah, let's get to that. So does anybody have any more comments on chapter 19? Kind of wrapping up the story with the prophesying, anything like that? Okay, let's get to chapter 20. Here, verse 1, chapter 20, 1 Samuel. Then David fled from Naioth in Ramah and came and said before Jonathan, "What have I done? What is my guilt and what is my sin before your father that he seeks my life?" And he said to him, "Far from it. You shall not die. Behold, my father does nothing, either great or small, without disclosing it to me. And why should my father hide this from me? It is not so." But David vowed again, saying, "Your father knows well that I have found favor in your eyes." And he thinks, "Do not let Jonathan know this, lest he be grieved. But truly, as the Lord lives and your soul lives, there is but a step between me and death." Then Jonathan said to David, "Whatever you say, I will do for you." David said to Jonathan, "Behold, tomorrow is the new moon, and I should not fail to sit at the table with the king. But let me go, that I may hide myself in the field till the third day at evening. If your father misses me at all, then say, David earnestly asked leave of me to run to Bethlehem, his city, for there is a yearly sacrifice there for all the clan. If he says good, it will be well with your servant. But if he is angry, then know that harm is determined by him. Therefore deal kindly with your servant, for you have brought your servant into a covenant of the Lord with you. But if there is guilt in me, kill me yourself, for why should you bring me to your father?" And Jonathan said, "Far be it from you. If I knew that it was determined by my father that harm should come to you, would I not tell you?" Then David said to Jonathan, "Who will tell me if your father answers you roughly?" And Jonathan said to David, "Come, let us go out into the field." So they both went out into the field. And Jonathan said to David, "The Lord, the God of Israel, be witness. When I have sounded out my father about this time tomorrow or the third day, behold, if he is well disposed toward David, shall I not then send and disclose it to you? But it should please my father to do you harm. But should it please my father to do you harm, the Lord do so to Jonathan, and more also, if I do not disclose it to you and send you away, that you may go in safety. May the Lord be with you as he has been with my father. If I am still alive, show me the steadfast love of the Lord, that I may not die. And do not cut off your steadfast love from my house forever, when the Lord cuts off every one of the enemies of David from the face of the earth." And Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, "May the Lord take vengeance on David's enemies." And Jonathan made David swear again by his love for him, for he loved him as he loved his own soul. Then Jonathan said to him, "Tomorrow is the new moon, and you will be missed, because your seat will be empty. On the third day, go down quickly to the place where you hid yourself when the matter was in hand, and remain beside the sown heap. And I will shoot 3 arrows to the side of it, as though I shot at a mark. And behold, I will send a boy, saying, Go find the arrows. If I say to the boy, Look, the arrows on this side of you, take them, then you are to come. For as the Lord lives, it is safe for you, and there is no danger. But if I say to the youth, Look, the arrows are beyond you, then go, for the Lord has sent you away. And as for the matter of which you and I have spoken, behold, the Lord is between you and me forever." So David hid himself in the field, And when the new moon came, the king sat down to eat food. The king sat on his seat, as at other times, on the seat by the wall. Jonathan sat opposite, and Abner sat by Saul's side, but David's place was empty. Yet Saul did not say anything that day, for he thought, something has happened to him. He is not clean. Surely he is not clean. But on the second day, the day after the new moon, David's place was empty. And Saul said to Jonathan his son, Why has not the son of Jesse come to the meal, either yesterday or today? Jonathan answered Saul, David earnestly asked leave of me to go to Bethlehem. He said, Let me go, for our clan holds a sacrifice in the city, and my brother has commanded me to be there. So now, if I have found favor in your eyes, let me get away and see my brothers. For this reason he has not come to the king's table. Then Saul's anger was kindled against Jonathan, and he said to him, You son of a perverse, rebellious woman, do I not know that you have chosen the son of Jesse to your own shame, and to the shame of your mother's nakedness? For as long as the son of Jesse lives on the earth, neither you nor your kingdom shall be established. Therefore send and bring him to me, for he shall surely die. Then Jonathan answered Saul his father, Why should he be put to death? What has he done? But Saul hurled his spear at him to strike him. So Jonathan knew that his father was determined to put David to death. And Jonathan rose from the table in fierce anger and ate no food the second day of the month, for he was grieved for David because his father had disgraced him. In the morning, Jonathan went out into the field to the appointment with David, and with him a little boy. And he said to his boy, Run and find the arrows that I shoot. As the boy ran, he shot an arrow beyond him. And when the boy when the boy came to the place of the arrow that Jonathan had shot, Jonathan called after the boy and said, Is not the arrow beyond you? And Jonathan called after the boy, Hurry, be quick, do not stay. So Jonathan's boy gathered up the arrows and came to his master, but the boy knew nothing. Only Jonathan and David knew the matter. And Jonathan gave his weapons to his boy and said to him, Go and carry them to the city. And as soon as the boy had gone, David rose from beside the stone heap and fell on his face to the ground and bowed 3 times. And they kissed one another and wept with one another, David weeping the most. Then Jonathan said to David, Go in peace, because we have sworn both of us in the name of the Lord, saying, The Lord shall be between me and you, and between my offspring and your offspring forever. And he rose and departed, and Jonathan went into the city. All right. That's chapter 20. So continue on with the same story. We pick up right where we left off in chapter 19. David leaves from Naioth in Ramah and goes to hide just outside the city. And was trying to figure out, okay, I'd like to be at this feast that's about to take place at the beginning of the month and be there with the king. It would be expected. It would be something where if people didn't see David sitting there, it would be a topic of discussion, like, where is David? Like, we've already talked about how David's rose to this position of prominence amongst the people, this great military leader. He's had great success in battle, and the people love him. And people, in a lot of ways, show support for Saul because of, David. Sometimes too much support for David has led Saul to obviously hate David. But, Saul has kind of gained some appreciation for the people because, that it pleased them to have David set up as this ruler, this authority figure in the army. So it's going to be clearly obvious if he's not there, and they're trying to figure out, hey, can I come back? What's the situation? David and Jonathan talk about it. Once again, Jonathan says, I'll go and figure this out, and if things happen and you can't come back, I'll shoot some arrows out in the field. If I tell the kid that goes and retrieves them that, hey, the arrow's beyond you, don't go grab it, then you can't come back in. Or if you can go gather them all in, then you can come back in. So that is their plan. I didn't want to spend a whole lot of time talking about their plan or idea, but let's go ahead and jump into what happens at the feast with Saul and Jonathan. So the first night, David doesn't show up. Saul doesn't say anything. We get this kind of inner thoughts of Saul about hey, maybe he actually has a reason for not being here. Maybe he's not clean and able to come to the feast. What is the discussion between father and son the second night when David doesn't show up? Dad?
Saul is evil, and he's disobedient to God. He's rebelling against God's word, and he has evil motives.
No one more loyal than a fellow follower of God.
Yeah, so, that hit on a lot of things there, but really what we've seen through chapter 19 and 20 is how close, not even just the relationship with David and Jonathan, but, we even saw Michal's devotion to her husband, usurp that of her father, the king. But David and Jonathan, we've seen this close-knit bond, and we've talked about it a lot already, about how that's built on this relationship that they have with God, and their love for God is what allows them to love each other as their own soul. And, Jonathan goes out on a limb and is, defying the desires of the king, his father, on behalf of David. And we finally get really Saul's line of thinking of why he doesn't understand Jonathan's support of David. David represents the end of your chance to be king in Saul's eyes. That is Saul's biggest point of contention. As long as David lives, your kingdom, your lineage is in jeopardy because he is going to be the new king. He is going to, threaten everything that I have tried to establish, that hopefully you will establish when you take over for me, all this stuff. Like, he is a threat to you. And if we look throughout, the past history of several different kingdoms, empires, whatever, right? When there is a new king that comes in, what happens to the old king's line and family and all that? What happens to them? They're killed, right? And so just like a bunch of other things that we've seen here, David and Jonathan have already gone totally against the common grain of everything else in history, right? Where everyone in history would have been like, well, it would have made sense for David to go in and kill Jonathan and kill all of Saul's kids and kill everyone that was connected to that family. Jonathan and David just made a pact that said, I will never abandon your family. Neither of us will abandon the other's family. Whether we're alive, we'll be there for one another. If we're not alive, we'll be there for our children and our families after that. We'll preserve one another. Every possible advisor would tell the future king, that's stupid, never do that, right? Because some people might latch on to the previous king's line and, support them, and now you have civil war or whatever. But David and Jonathan don't think that way. Jonathan has never thought about preserving his own kingdom or being king or anything like that. He's seen the whole time that God is with David. He's loved David in spite of the fact that it means sacrificing his throne. The chance of the throne is never even considered within Jonathan's motivations. He doesn't care about that when you compare it to his affection and love for David. But everything that Jonathan thinks about is the opposite of what Saul thinks about. Saul thinks about continuing his line on the throne, keeping the power, maintaining this position of authority in the kingdom of Israel. Jonathan is the opposite. And that, in a way, is so indicative of what we are trying to do as well, right? Where, yes, everything worldly would tell us, like, to live in subjection to a higher authority that tells us to give up our own desires and make someone else's desires our own. That goes against every sort of worldly teaching. No, you go and indulge in your desires. And we are literally sitting here saying, I want Jesus to take my desires and make his my desires. I want my desires to just be the desires that Jesus had. Everybody else is saying, that's dumb, right? Saul's saying, don't do that. Don't make David's desires your desires. Don't make God's desires your desires. Make your desires what come first and put your kingdom first. And David and Jonathan are this great example of, putting God first, in spite of the fact that everyone around them is generally, we see a lot of wickedness when God is not established as king and ruler and authority, not only over a nation of Israel, but also over the individual lives that we all, are leading, right? We need God to lead us in order to expect success, expect, good things down the road. So, yeah, we didn't get through everything. We'll pick up a little bit of this before we carry on to chapter 21 and kind of this. We're going to head on to this journey of David fleeing from Saul now. But thank you all for your comments. We'll pick up in lesson 306 next week. I believe it's just chapter 21. Oh, 21 to 22. Thanks, everybody.